Hi everyone. So the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference has just happened for 2017, and there was quite a lot that was thrown at us. And for us audio producers, and to a secondary point video producers, which I'll kind of throw in because a lot of people do a bit of both, and how they're actually different from each other. Today we're going to talk about what came up, what's great, what's useless, and how it relates to us. So let's go through in order what happened in the presentation. So the TV OS and the Watch OS, they don't make any difference to us at all. High Sierra, if you're a Mac user, could be interesting in some ways. I mean, mostly there's very little difference for me, OS to OS, that actually affects audio guys, apart from it's a bad thing because then makers like Pro Tools don't offer compatibility for a while. One of the interesting things though is the new Apple file system, which is going to replace HFS, could be quite useful because as we move into entirely solid-state drive-based systems, the old file systems weren't really designed for that, and then this should hopefully cut out quite a lot of timing lag with things like copying files and what have you, where it just does it. It's going to be quite useful. So the new iMacs. If you're looking to get a new iMac, then the new updates will always be useful for you. They may not be night and day, but a small improvement is always good, and if it's for no extra money, then great. So they're using the new Kaby Lake processors, which are a small incremental development and improvement on what's gone before, maybe like 10% improvement. So they're slightly faster than previous generations with a bit better power efficiency, which is a good thing in something as small as an iMac. I mean, yes, they're quite big, but if you look at them from the side, they're practically flat, which means there's nowhere for the heat to go. So if it makes less heat, then it's less of a problem. Great. And the smaller Macs can have up to 32 gigabytes of memory, and the larger one can have 64 gig of memory. That's great, but unless you use like massive orchestral libraries or something like that, I've found that 16 is perfectly fine. I mean, my monster of a laptop has 32 gigabytes of RAM, in the studio computer only has 16, and I've found no reason to update that at all. Because all the VSTs, plugins, what have you, only take a certain amount of memory. The samples themselves take a certain amount of memory, and beyond that, they don't load crazy amounts. 16 gigabytes of RAM is a lot. So, I mean, it's nice that you can add extra. If you want to, go ahead. If you're a video guy, you might find that extra RAM helps your rendering go quicker, or if you're an animator or such. But for audio guys, 16, I find at this moment in time at least, is plenty. So now they're using these Fusion drives as standard, which is still a little bit worrying. I mean, yeah, they're trying to keep it to a price point, although they're still pretty expensive. It's a bit weird that in 2017 they're still using spinning drives as the main bulk of the storage. I mean, I can still understand why you would use spinning drive hard drives as like external storage, external backup, because they're quite cheap for the amount of size you get. But the performance on them really is lacking, and the Fusion thing, sure, that can help with your OS, but with everything else it won't speed everything up. If anything, it might interfere in the background while you're trying to record loads of audio. There's also Thunderbolt 3, which is fine, but most audio interfaces that are Thunderbolt are only Thunderbolt 1 or 2. I mean, yes, it's backwards compatible, so don't worry about it, but it's just one of those things where they've pushed ahead with new technology, so now you need more adapters, and you're not seeing any extra benefit because audio doesn't take up masses of bandwidth. Thunderbolt is good for audio interfaces though, because it's a direct connection to the processor, so it skips all the USB FireWire crap. I've talked about that in other videos. This is much more straight down the line. Thunderbolt 3 is great, and there's 2 Thunderbolt 3 ports on these new iMacs, which is plenty. Talking about the pricing of the iMacs and the MacBooks, at the very least the pricing of kind of the mid-range ones has come down a bit, which is a good thing because it's definitely a big barrier to entry with Macs. And I've said this till I'm blue in the face that yes, they should be a premium product, but the pricing they're at is higher than I think is reasonable. Another interesting thing is with the 13-inch MacBook Pro, they're selling a cheaper model that doesn't have the touch bar. Why can't they do that with the 15-inch model? Why can't the 15-inch model have no touch bar as a cheaper option? Because I'll bet you 90% of people would go for the cheaper option. In audio, we don't need that stupid touch bar thing. It's cute, it's not practical. If you hear any whoomp noises in the background, I'm updating all 4 of my iPad minis at the moment to a newer version of iOS 10. I will talk about iOS 11 in a minute, but in the meantime, let's talk about the elephant in the room, the iMac Pro. Now, in terms of audio, guys, this is what a lot of you guys have been waiting for. This is the beast. It's looking really interesting and also quite frustrating at the same time. Now let's talk about why. So the processors that they're putting in are the Xeon kind of server line processors, which is great. And the minimum is an 8-core up to 18-core processor. And this is where it gets a little bit complicated, because if you know anything about the way that programs work with multi-thread, programs have to be designed to take advantage of lots of cores. And this is going to be a problem for audio, because if you get an 8-core processor, that's probably fantastic for heavy workloads. An 18-core processor is probably not going to do that much better, because you have to think of audio, especially real-time audio, where it's coming in from an interface, being processed and going back out again. You have to think of it in stages, because what happens is the audio comes in from the interface, the CPU has to know that it's there, and then kind of record it somehow, then send it out to its relative channel, then it goes through any effects that are on that channel, it then goes through any send buses that you've got, the reverb or whatever that you've got on those send buses then has to be processed, then it all has to go through group buses, then it has to go through the master bus and any effects that are on that master bus before it goes out again. So that's a lot of things that have to be done. Now, you might think that more cores means it can do all of those things, but that's not the case, because the problem here is it has to do each one of those things in order. So the problem is, no matter how many cores you've got, you can't make that process go any faster just by adding more cores, because like, say you can't process the reverbs for a channel until you've done the effects on that channel, so you have to wait for the next one and the next one and the next one, which is why processors with higher clock speeds do better for audio, because then doing things in that chain can literally go quicker and can be shoved back out faster, which is why, say, a quad core that's running at 5 gigahertz would perform better than an 8-core running at 2 gigahertz, for example, because it's not the number of cores you have, it's a combination of up to a point how many cores that can handle, and then at the speed of the processor. I've found this a lot in mastering. Mastering is a great example where you might have a ton of effects and processes, not doing very much, just doing little things like a little bit of EQ, a little bit of compression. You might end up with, I don't know, 9 or 10 of these plugins on a single channel, and you find that even on an 8-core or 10-core processor, it still starts to struggle and make that grinding noise, and you think, well, it's got all these cores, what's the problem? The problem is, it's having to do all that processing on one single core, because it's having to do each little bit of that process in order. So to do that efficiently, it has to dedicate that to one core, so more makes no difference. The only way to improve that in a mastering context is to have the faster processor. And the other thing is, as you put more cores on a chip, it gets hotter, so the only way to have it not explode is to have it not run as fast, which is how server chips tend to work. Now, those like 18-core processors are great for servers for things like, I don't know, databases where it can be doing lots of things at once, or video processing is a great one, because unless you're doing a live broadcast, if you're editing in something like Final Cut or Premiere, what it can do is it can have one core that's kind of doing the whole management thing, and then going, right, You're this core, you're doing that frame, you're doing that frame, you're doing that frame, you're doing that frame, and spread it across loads of cores, and then say, right, when you're all done, meet me back here, we'll put them in order, and when the guy presses play, it'll be ready. And because video is such a heavy task and isn't dependent on like millisecond latency like audio is, that works great. For us audio guys, it's a different ballgame. Okay, let's talk about the new Vega graphics from AMD Radeon. They sound really nice, and that's quite an exciting thing, again, for like video guys or if you want to play games, but for audio, it's probably not going to make a difference because all the plugins that we have, all the interfaces that you have, apart from maybe like a cute little spinning tape machine or something, they're all 2D, they're not graphically intensive. And that's why you can run all this stuff on a laptop that's just got like the Intel integrated graphics, because that side of the audio program doesn't take a lot of power. So it's essentially wasted on us. If it's $1,000 graphics card, that's $1,000 that we're essentially throwing away, unless you do things like content creation like I do with, video work as well. One thing that'll pass a lot of people by is when they were talking about the memory, up to 128 gigabytes of ECC memory. Like I was just saying earlier that the amount of RAM doesn't make a big difference to audio guys, unless you do massive orchestral samples, in which case you are the exception. You know what you need, so you just go and do that, hey. But ECC is really quite an important thing. If I had no budgetary limits at all, I would definitely get a computer for audio that had ECC memory. And what that is, error correcting memory. Now what that means is on the fly, in real time, data is whizzing into the memory really fast and being thrown back out again really fast. And for what you would generally do with a desktop computer, something like a game, if there's a small, like a 1-bit error somewhere, that usually comes and goes and no big deal. If that happens in programs like audio workstations, that's where you end up with a program that crashes, or a blue screen, or all the horrible things. And memory errors are one of the main causes of system hangs, blue screens, all that bad stuff. So error correcting memory has a chip on board that checks everything as it comes in, and if something's wrong, it talks to the processor, the CPU, goes, hang on a minute, this is wrong. Make sure it finds out the right answer, and you never see that as a user, and it's just fixed and it carries on, and there's no crash, no blue screen, no bad things, which is amazing. That's the kind of thing that's brought over from servers, where it's more expensive to make, but it means that the servers don't crash, which is worth more money to them than paying more for the hardware. If it costs an extra $100 or $200 for error correcting memory, and the server doesn't crash and cost them $10,000 in a lawsuit or downtime or whatever, that's worth it. And for audio guys, video guys, if you've got critical work, even hitting the save button every 5 seconds, let's say you're in the studio with, I don't know, Linkin Park or some other big artist, the singer is in the middle of a crucial take, hitting absolute gold, and the computer just hangs and crashes. That, in theory at least, won't happen with error correcting memory, so that's something that I am quite excited about. Now, there's 4 Thunderbolt 3 ports on the Imac Pro. Again, it's nice, but surely that's just costing us extra when we probably only needed 2. I mean, if you've got an audio interface that uses 1 and an external backup drive or something, I mean, again, if you're a video guy, you might have a capture card on 1 and, but again, it's a slightly different market. And the price for the basic model, the 8-core Xeon that's got 32 gigabytes of memory, $5,000. What? That's a lot. That's a high barrier to entry. If you consider that it's just about $2,000 for the iMac and then more than twice as much for this machine that probably isn't twice as powerful, it's a big barrier to entry there, and that's one of the main reasons I'm not just going to go out and get an iMac Pro. It's not about affording it, it's about, that's a lot it's just a lot no matter how many times you slice it. That's the basic model as well. How much is the high-end model going to cost? 10,000 or more for that serious monster? I mean, if you're working in a job where you can guarantee that that extra money will pay for itself in your time saved, then of course it's a no-brainer for you. But for those who are aspirational and thinking, well, if I get this powerful Mac, it will make my mixes better and that kind of thing, maybe up to a point, but $5,000, man. You're not going to get that much better of a mix out of an 8-core processor than you are out of the top 4-core processor that's in the top-end normal iMac. And I mean, if you find that your mixes on the latest Kaby Lake highest spec iMacs are starting to max out, maybe you should be looking at these alternative solutions, but to just go out and get one is really throwing your money down the drain. And the other thing that worries me about these iMacs is that side view again, with the $5,000 at least, for this thing that's got a nice 5K screen, but so does the $2,000 model. That screen is great. It's probably a $1,000 screen, maybe, but it's strapped to an entire workstation computer, which is going to kick out a lot of heat with nowhere for it to go. And I have seen that Apple have been talking about improved cooling, but there's only so much that you can do with cooling. I mean, physics is a thing. The heat has to go somewhere, and that thing is tiny. That's one of the reasons why the Mac Towers did so well, is there's quite a lot of space inside it to get that heat pushed out without it sounding like a hairdryer. And that's something that I have heard rumours that this iMac Pro is just a stopgap until a Mac Pro Tower comes out, and I really hope that's the case. Because if that's the case, you shouldn't touch this iMac Pro with a 10-foot barge pole. You should wait, get the Mac Pro Tower and a separate 5K screen, because that's the other thing. When your iMac Pro is 3 or 4 years old and out of date and pedestrian, you can't take that 5K screen with you. You're going to have to buy a new one, because you can't just do an input to that screen and use that. You will have to buy more equipment. And that's the thing, with something this expensive, you have to think of it as a long-term investment and the longevity you're going to get out of it. If you can justify the cost of something that expensive over a set number of years, the more years you can justify it for, the more, it looks like a reasonable investment. So if the screen was separate to the machine, even if it cost an extra $1,000, sure, the next time you need the machine, you don't need the screen again. You've saved $1,000. That's just basic economy. You've got to think about like this kind of high-end workstation and the separate parts. I mean, I know video professionals who are using the same high-end 10-bit monitor that they were using nearly 10 years ago because they invested in it at the time. And that money, that huge amount of money that they spent, has now paid off because of the longevity. It's something you've really got to consider with, yes, a Mac at $2,000 is expensive, but $2,000 spread over, 3 years? That can be seen as a reasonable investment. $5,000 starts to become questionable. Now, one last thing that I want to talk about is iOS 11, because there are going to be a few new interesting features on the iPad. There's a couple of iPads out with the new processors that are a little bit faster. This is the iPad Pro with the A9X in it, and honestly I don't feel like I need to upgrade this because it's just been so fast. I mean, I've had this since the iPad Pro came out and it's absolutely doing as well as I would hope. Now, there's the Files app. That's an interesting U-turn from Apple there, because they've always tried to shield us from the behind-the-scenes stuff. The Files app will be really interesting, I think, for the kind of guys who do a lot of audio work, because if you'll be able to see behind the scenes and copy the files from one app to another, maybe from, copy your audio from GarageBand to something more professional like Aria or Cubase, or maybe get your synth samples and drop them in, or whatever it is. Being able to do a file management system, that's going to be a big deal for us. What else? I did see that there was a drag and drop feature now for files, for things like Dropbox. That's going to be really interesting, being able to drag and drop like audio files from Dropbox straight into Cubase or GarageBand. That's going to be a big deal. And there's the new AirPlay 2 feature, which has got multi-room. I wonder if that can be repurposed, so that instead of multi-room, you could have multi-output. So you could have, say, a different headphone mix for different guys who are running their own systems. So you could do like a full laptop multi-output mix. So there's a lot of potential there in iOS 11 that's going to be interesting for us. I mean, aside from all the Siri stuff, which is cute, but it's a consumer thing, it's not an audio guy thing. So hopefully this has given you some insight into kind of my thoughts on the developers conference and everything that's coming out. I really hope that the new Mac Pro tower, as an actual tower, comes out soon and not just the trash can again. So thanks for watching. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this, and please subscribe to the channel for more content, not just like this, but mixed tutorials, gear reviews. There's a lot coming with Audient, 2Notes, there's loads of stuff coming up. So stick around and I'll see you guys in the next video.